welcome to the Jig Is Up. If you guys are interested in exclusive Jig Is Up episodes, some really great rewards, you can head over to our Patreon page, and a link will be in the description of this episode, and pledge any amount you'd like. What does this do for the show? It's going to allow us to get out to more events, more communities, and be able to bring on more guests. Most importantly, it keeps our show completely advertisement-free and independent, which is super important to us. Today's guest is a guy that's been a guide in Jasper National Park for years. He's Métis. He's opened and been operating his own guide company in Jasper called the Jasper Tour Company. And more recently, he's become part of a network of Indigenous companies focusing on Indigenous tourism. I hope you guys enjoy my conversation with Joe Urie. All right, I want to welcome to the show Joe from Jasper Tour Company in Jasper, Alberta. Welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for having me, Darcy.
Awesome. So, tell us a little bit about how you run a guide company in Jasper. So, tell us kind of how did you end up in Jasper? I know you're not from Jasper originally, so how did you kind of end up there and end up being a tour guide and stuff?
Well, I came to Jasper 30 years ago this year, so 1988, and it was kind of just on a whim. I think that there's a little bit more of a backstory to the whim as time went on, but initially I was working in forestry with a buddy out in BC in Prince George, and our jobs were done. It was the end of September. Before that, I'd been working in mines, and I really didn't. I saw myself experiencing an early death in the mine shaft, so I was like, I don't want to go back to that.
Yeah.
So we saw a sign basically said Jasper, jobs, and we went, well, that sounds all right. And we arrived in the mountains in October of 1988.
Wow.
And it was kind of wild because at that point in time, I wasn't really aware of the connection to where I live now here in Jasper and my own personal history. But it slowly eroded until it was there and I could see it all. It was pretty cool. I wasn't a guide from the moment I got here. Yeah. I didn't start guiding until the early 2000s, 2001. So I've been at it now for 17 years.
Wow.
But it slowly came to be.
Well, and then you started your own company how long ago?
2011. I was out there doing essentially a similar thing to what I do now, but things started to grow. It's a pretty busy place now. I mean, you're down in Calgary. I imagine you step off to Banff every now and again.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And you see, like, it's especially in the summer months, it's kind of organized chaos down there.
Yeah.
Well, some of the companies that I worked for were growing, and as much as I appreciate their efforts, I wasn't really a big fan of being out on the landscape with hordes and hordes of people.
Yeah.
And my wife, actually, she was the one to recognize it first, and she was sort of like, Jesus, you're turning into a bit of a bastard. So she said she could see my misery, and so she said, well, just step off that bus and start your own thing and dial it in the way that you want to. So now it's a partnership, my wife and I, and it's not a big company. It's just us, and we have a few other guides that work with us. But basically, you get out onto the landscape with just a few people, no more usually than about a dozen.
Okay.
And that way you have a far greater opportunity to sort of reach everybody. If you're out there with masses of people, it's really hard to do.
Yeah.
And it's also easier. It's very important to me that my guests kind of experience this place, like get their feet on the ground. We do travel about the park, but we take the opportunity to get your feet on the ground. And really the attempt by me anyway is to make them try to feel like they're one of the very first people to walk through these mountains.
Yeah. No, that's really a cool way to look at it.
Yeah, it's. I think it provides a hell of a lot better of an experience. Not to belittle those other offerings, because hey, you know what I mean. There's some people who just can't get on the landscape. There's a lot of busloads full of seniors, and good for them for getting off the couch and going having a look around. But
yeah.
they can't get too far away from the bus, and whatever. That's good for them. At least they're out and doing it. But for those people who can, they're the people that I want to come with me, and I want them to get their hands dirty, sort of thing.
Absolutely, yeah. It's funny. I used to teach scuba diving, and I found that too. That there was at least here in Banff, there was a real point in time where all of the scuba diving shops in Calgary were just taking hordes of people out there to try to teach them scuba diving, do the open water part of their scuba diving. So you'd have 3 instructors and 37 students, and it was just chaos. And I did that. I did that about twice, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to do like 6 students, just me, and we're going to swim around and have fun. And it was way better.
It is, and you know what? There's a moment where you realize that somebody kind of lost the plot. It all became just about money, money. And don't get me wrong. I mean, we need money. We need money to exist.
Yeah.
But how much of it do we truly, honestly need? And we, my wife and I, we get by. We've got 3 kids. We pay our bills. We get a holiday, nice food on the table. We're not going to ever be rich, but we're lifestyle millionaires, right?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. As soon as you say you live in Jasper or something, everybody just, I think, it mentally has this picture that, like, you're just living in heaven. Everything is just rosy, and which it might be. I don't know.
You know what? It can be a little bit utopic. It can be. Yeah. There's certainly things creeping into utopia right now that are kind of scary. Pine beetle being the big thing, but it's important, I think, like when my kids were growing up, I mean, I might drive them into the city and get them stuck in rush hour traffic, and they're like, what the hell are we doing here? And I'm going, I'm just wanting you to know what everyone else does on a regular basis, just so that you appreciate where you live,
Absolutely.
The skies are clear, the water's clean, but you still have to be an advocate for a better world, despite the beauty of the world that you live in your little bubble,
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think they're fairly keen on that sort of thing. But
well, and I think that's a great thing is they'll see, like, okay, well, here's this beautiful place we're living in, but really the urbanization, the urban sprawl is just continuing. So it's even, especially down here in Calgary, we notice it where we're just getting bigger and wider and wider.
Yeah. It's pretty vast, isn't it? I mean, I think Calgary, when I drive into Calgary and I see the housing, especially right on the outskirts of town, and at first it just baffles me where you see those houses and it looks like if you piss out your bathroom window, you can pee in your neighbor's toilet because they're that close together.
Absolutely.
But from an infrastructure perspective, it makes excellent sense. It really does. But I think, despite Calgary, I mean, despite your close proximity to the mountains and to the rolling plains right there, I meet tons of people from the city, Edmonton or Calgary, who just have no clue about what's going on out there in the real, or not the real, in the natural world.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that there's a lot of people that just they never get out of the city. And I'm not going to judge people. It is what it is, but I think it's unfortunate. I think you're really missing out on a huge part of life if you don't ever get out there to the natural world and just sit by a tree or listen to running water and stuff like that.
And that exactly right there, listening to running water, and you can do it in Calgary, the Bow River and whatnot, as long as you get up early enough before all the traffic starts to run. But if you take that 1 minute of your day and you sit by, you just close your eyes and hush up for a moment and listen to the running water. Whoa, suddenly it's like taking drugs, suddenly you're like, wow, that was amazing. And you want more. And it doesn't take long before suddenly you're like, hey, you know what? I got to make these escapes a little bit more frequently.
Absolutely.
And you're right. You can do it right there. You don't necessarily have to go all the way into the mountains.
Yeah. Well, that's just it. Even in the cities, you can find lots of like parks and stuff, like natural areas that are fairly quiet or sheltered away from the city, and just take a moment to be quiet in them. And that's one of the best getaways you can do because it's quick and easy. So.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So being a guide in Jasper, I mean, we have all these. every once in a while I'll see these posts of like, things that guides have been asked, and it's, all these weird questions from tourists, and I can't imagine some of the things you've seen or experienced. Is there stuff that I guess stands out for you?
Yeah, there's some weird stuff, some funny stuff. I mean, somebody down in Banff, I can't even remember. I think they used to work at the Parks Info Center. They were a parks employee. Once put a book out called like "Does the Bear Shit in the Woods" or something like that, and it was just like a compilation of the ridiculous things that people ask. But and I say ridiculous in a very kind and affectionate sort of way, because when you do get into some of those really urban places, and those urban places like going overseas, let's say to Europe, where they've been urban for that long, we're talking centuries of it.
Yeah.
They're that far disconnected. Some of those questions suddenly aren't that ridiculous anymore,
Oh yeah.
You can see how they come by it honestly, but it still makes us chuckle our asses off, right? But yeah, I don't know, like one time start kind of chuckling to my guess, well, of all the places they couldn't find a picnic table, they got to do it on the side of the road. Ha 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 ha. We pull up the road, we get about 300 meters up the road, and all of a sudden this bear comes across the road in front of us from the left to the right, and then directly behind her is the big boar who's in love with her, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh shit, because they turn and they start moving towards the Germans barbecuing, right?
Oh wow.
So but they drop down in a ditch and into the bush, so the Germans can't see them. So I spin around and I start heading back, but now I'm driving down the wrong side of the road, waving my fists madly, head out the window, hey, 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 hey. And these guys step around their vehicle to look and see what I'm freaking out about, but they can't see the bears, so they just think I'm some kind of an idiot. And finally I come whipping up and I turn my vehicle sideways and I jump out, and just then the bears come out of the ditch. And they're like, oh, whatever. Freaky swearing in German, and I run around the vehicle, and I'm yelling, bear, 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 and they jump in their van, slam the door, but they leave the barbecue just puffing away there. So I reach very carefully underneath, grab the thing by the legs and lift it up, and I'm standing looking at these three wide-eyed Germans through their window going, you can't leave this here. And they open the door, they reach, grab the barbecue, pull it in the van, slam the door, and start driving down the road, smoke billowing out the windows of the thing. And I jump back in my vehicle, slam the door, and just as the bears come around the passenger side, and my guests are like, oh my God, we thought you were going to eat it there, So anyway, we have a chuckle, we drive along, we go up farther, we turn around, we come back, and the bears have gone down into the bush again. And we're down the road another couple of clicks, come around a corner, and here's the Germans barbecuing again on the side of the road. And just as we're pulling up, the two bears come out of the woods again. And this time I'm like, natural selection, we're on it, we're out of here. Let's just keep rolling,
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, these kinds of things they seem to be happening more and more and more frequently, because there's just more and more people coming with sort of not, they don't have the kind of savviness to understand just protocol sort of thing. But again, I think that some of them come by it honestly, and probably in the Germans' case that they think it's a legitimate experience, right? Just to park on the side of the road and set up your barbecue.
Yeah.
But,
well, and I think the thing, too, for us is we got to keep in mind that, grizzly bears and stuff don't live all over the world. So to a lot of people, grizzly bears really are all they know is they're teddy bears.
You know what? I say that frequently, and this is how I will sort of bring it into their own reality. When I see people, the bear jams and people crowding the bears, I tell them there's 8 species of bear in the world, only one of which is not endangered at some level or form, and that's the North American black bear. There's 7.6 billion people on the planet, and I ask my guests, have you ever seen a bear before? And usually most of them, nope, never. Well, not in the wild, seen one in the zoo.
Yeah.
And I say, well, if we should see a bear tonight, you're amongst the tiniest of fractions who can say I've seen a bear in the wild. And the way that life is going for bears, you may be amongst the tiniest of fractions who'll ever be able to say that, unless we don't pull up our pants and stop crapping all over their ecosystems.
Absolutely.
Sort of thing.
So do you, I guess going back to a little bit more serious topic, do you find in the national parks, like in Jasper at least, where you're at, are you finding it more and more where things are, I guess the habitat, the ecosystem is getting damaged more and more? Is there a level of plateau that it's hit, or is it still kind of,
there's the numbers of visitors to the national parks it's increasing exponentially, and it has in the last few years. In particular, last year I guess was probably a big banner year because correlating with Canada 150.
Yeah.
You have all of this marketing that's been going on for heavy duty for well over a decade to two, and then they bumped it up with this free, everyone can go to the parks for free.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a nice gesture, I suppose, but I don't know that everybody was well prepared and planned for everyone taking them up on their offer. It's like you invite some friends over and the word spreads, and all of a sudden 50 people are at your door and you've only got potato chips for 5, right?
Yeah.
But so for the most part, though, the majority of the guests, they're not really getting too far off the beaten path. And so it's really the beaten path that's taking a beating, right? They're trying to accommodate all these people. And some of the, some of the wildlife that have adapted to the beaten path. Some people like to call it habituation. I mean, I don't see it as habituation as much as it's adaptation until people start, feeding them and whatnot.
Yeah.
They're the ones that are suffering the most because people just don't get it, I joke about this too to my guests. I say, you come along and you see a bear jam, then people are out of their cars and they're that close, and people will always say, if you try to tell them, and Parks just doesn't have enough staff to police these sort of things. And you talk to them and they say, oh, we didn't know. And I'm like, bullshit, and I mean, I don't say that to them because I don't want to, belittle them or anything like that.
Yeah.
But to be honest, like one of the things I'll say to my people, I say, you know what? I know that they know. Mm-hmm. And the reason that I know that is the simple fact that I've never been to India. Right? You ever been to India, Darcy?
No, I never have.
No? But I bet if you go there, you shouldn't go near the friggin' tigers, right?
Yes. Absolutely.
But have you ever seen one in the wild, Darcy?
No, I have not. No, and I wouldn't be trying to get a picture of it.
Right. All the way over here. You know that. So they can't tell me that they didn't know you shouldn't go near that bear or you shouldn't go near that lion in Africa.
Yeah.
That it's just it was common sense, but sense isn't common anymore. But anyway, things like that. There are other issues that are a little bit more political with the park in terms of conservationism. And we have some amazing, amazing people on the ground here in the park who are doing their best to protect the place. And I don't know if you guys know, and I think you must have seen that article. It was in the Calgary papers just a few days ago about the federal government looking deeper into too much development in the national park.
I did see that, yeah. Both in Banff and Jasper, they said they're going to try to slow down the commercialization or something. Right.
So that's a great sentiment, but what's left to be seen is if it's just lip service or not. How you do that, I don't know. And of course, we want people to come to the park. We want them to try to experience nature. But for me, the point has always been, how do you establish some form of balance? I need to have balance in what I do in order to justify what I do.
Yeah.
I can't just simply go out there and when I see things getting a little too Disney-like, it's tough, right?
Yeah, it is. And the thing that made me curious from that article is I don't think the sprawl of, like in my case, Banff, because I go there quite a bit.
Yeah.
I don't see the sprawl as growing, and I don't think it has for quite some time. So I don't know what they mean by that either, because I'm like, well, there's businesses there, and we're not like building skyscrapers there, so I don't know.
No. So you must know. I'm not sure if you're aware of it, but there's kind of you've got your municipal boundary both in Banff and Jasper, and both Banff and Jasper had vote. They used to both be solely governed 100% by Parks Canada, so Ottawa essentially, right?
Oh wow.
And then in the 80s there was a vote for autonomy. At that point in time, Banff voted for it, Jasper voted against it, and it wasn't really that Jasper didn't want autonomy. It's just, I think the guise of it at the time wasn't appealing to Jasper.
Right.
There was a fear that things would go off the deep end, that it would just, the sprawl would occur.
Yeah.
So they restructured a deal, and Jasper finally got it in like 2000. Whereas you have the municipal footprint, and despite the municipal control, everything that has to do with land is still controlled by Parks Canada. So I mean, it's something as simple. Let's say I'm looking out the window of my house, and there's a tree growing right in front of my window, an indigenous tree, but it's blocking a view of that mountain. I can't just go into my yard and cut that tree down, despite the fact that it's on my leasehold and my property, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
So something as simple as that, or as trying to put up a building, there's height restrictions and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
So what you've seen in Banff and what you've seen here is basically, and over the years of, if you've gone to Banff, you've seen old places taken down and new structures, bigger structures, going up in the same places.
Yeah, that's true.
That's what their sprawl is now. And Banff is a little bit different than Jasper, because Banff has, this close proximity to over 1 million people.
Yeah.
So they're dealing with a daily count that we don't see as much, because if you're living in Calgary, you can wake up in the morning and go, hey, what do you want to do today? Oh, let's take a drive into Banff, and you go to Banff, and then you go home.
Yeah.
So you're not only going to have all those hotel rooms and campsites and everything full, but you're going to have people who are just in and out in a day. I heard last year that there were lineups from the park gates out by Canmore there all the way back to the Stony Nakota resort there on some days.
Yeah, I would believe it, actually. It was insane. Yeah.
Yeah, that's nuts. That is nuts. So, those issues are things that have to be dealt with, but there's certainly they're being dealt with on another level than I'm on. Parks Canada will have these forums, and they will put things up for a public consultation, and I try my best to be involved in it, just so like the guy who doesn't vote but bitches about the government. It's like, sorry buddy, but your voice doesn't count. I at least get out there and say my part, so that when I do bitch or whatnot, that I have the right to do so, right?
Absolutely.
There's a lot to bitch about.
Well, yeah.
And one of the things that's really interesting, I don't know if you read about or heard about this last fall, but the SIMP, some people of the Shuswap people from the interior BC, they conducted a hunt here last fall.
I think I remember hearing about that, yeah.
Yeah. So there was a lot of outrage, because it was kind of sprung onto into the press and whatnot, sprung onto everybody basically the day that it started, and the vitriol was disgusting. I mean, the racism was just ridiculous.
Oh yeah.
And I think a lot of people could have, if they had had a better explanation, they might not have opened their mouths up quite so vehemently. But I'm hoping one of the things that will help save the parks or protect them is that there'll be more and more and more Indigenous consultation in the park. And there's precedents already. Like if you look at Guayhanas National Park on Haida Gwaii, the Haida people are a huge factor in that place, right? And like with most of our cultures across Canada, everything is so intricately intertwined with the land that to protect your culture, you've got to protect the landscape.
Absolutely.
So, these folks came in and they conducted a hunt. It was a small, I think they took a total of like 5 elk, 2 sheep, and a mule deer or something like that.
Okay.
And, some of the outrage, oh my God, if all the Indians get out there and start shooting animals, there'll be no animals left. Nobody bitches about the hundreds and hundreds of animals that CN kills every year on the railroad tracks, or CP down in Banff for that matter. Mm-hmm. Nobody says a damn word. And that's just the calculated numbers just through the national park are sky high, never mind across the whole country, right?
Oh yeah.
But I'm hoping that one of the things that will, sort of help the parks out is having more Indigenous consultation and maybe even some sort of managerial positions as well. The thing with those folks coming in is that they're from BC. They are unceded, unsurrendered, no treaties, no nothing. So as far as they're concerned, they had every right to come in and do it, right?
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So, we'll see how it is. Right now we're in this stage here There was a National Geographic article a couple of years ago when the U.S. Park Service had their 100th birthday, and the article was called "Loving Our Parks to Death."
Oh yeah.
And that's kind of the stage we're at. Like, the people showing up, they are legitimately here for the right reasons, but there's just not the education. Well, it's difficult to educate that many people on, yeah, come and love it, but there's parameters to how you do that, right?
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
So we'll see. Time will tell.
Well, and you're in an interesting spot too, because you're in Jasper, which was only they kicked the Métis out in order to make Jasper. So there's actually that history to it, which I find very few people even know. Even amongst Métis people. So, does that ever play? I guess, does that play into how you kind of look at things?
Yeah, it totally does, and it's also played a big role in kind of opening up doors to my own history, to rediscovering or reconnecting with my own roots.
Mm-hmm.
When I first arrived in the park, a couple of things. One, I didn't really know anything about the Mountain Métis people who got the boot when the area became a park in early 1900s.
Yeah.
And I wasn't really all that connected with my own personal history for two reasons. One, I was that young, and nobody really gives a shit about history until they feel they're starting to become a part of history. So, and then the other thing was that, basically, I think starting with my grandmother. I mean, my grandmother was the first generation of Métis people in my family who were part of that, hiding in plain sight generation.
Yeah.
And so there was a lot of history that was just kind of kept away. I mean, while I always knew that was our history, we didn't really talk about it too much.
Yeah.
So, I started delving into the Mountain Métis. And it's something that I'll deliver on some of my tours on the experience. But I try to stay away from storytelling in terms of personal stories, because they're not really my stories to tell. But from a purely historical context, I try to do it justice, and I don't candy coat things. I mean, parks the government had kind of done that in the past. It wasn't a nice thing,
Yeah.
But in terms of reconciliation, now they're trying to make good, and they're doing better with it.
Yeah.
But I had this one thing happened to me. I was actually trail running, and I was running by myself. It was like 22K trail run, but the trail that I took, I pop out onto this place, and it's along the Athabasca River. And there was an old homestead of one of the Métis families. It was John Moberly's homestead, which is actually burnt in 1989.
Oh.
I saw it before it burnt, and I actually know the people who burnt it. And it was a total accident, and they were teenagers. They'd been climbing up at Mount Collin, and they came down, and they were freezing. The weather was crap, and they lit a fire inside on the floor. It was a dirt floor.
Yeah.
And they put it out, but it had leached underground, and it spread to the so it was really tragic, but the remnants are there, about sort of shoulder height.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm running on, I burst through the trees, and I run onto this plain, and all of a sudden, I don't know if I was having a vision or if I was dehydrated, but it was a really hot day. But suddenly there in front of me was John Moberly's homestead, and it was complete. It was intact. Wow. And as I came running up to the place, John Moberly came out and leaned against the front door and lit up a pipe. And I came running up, sort of eyes wide open, and he was like, "Hey, I know you." And I said, "No, you don't." And he was like, "Okay, no, I don't know you, but I know your people." And I kind of shook my head, and it was gone, and the place was in ruins again. And I was just like, "Okay." And then I took off again. But it was that moment, I kind of buried that. I didn't tell anybody about it for a long time, because I thought everyone would think, "Yeah, right, buddy. What kind of drugs are you on?" Yeah. But it suddenly, then I started looking into it, and it started to dawn on me, that era, my history is on the Athabasca River. My people came from Red River settlements, arriving in 1860, and back then, during the dying days of the fur trade, everybody along the river would have known each other. The river was a means of an economy, of transportation and communication.
Yeah.
So there was a history that my great-great-grandfather played into, which is fairly prominent in the fur trade history and in Alberta history, that definitely when he did it, which was to kill the Methi Portage, establishing a trade route through the Grand Rapids on the Athabasca River, that the word would have traveled from community to community. Hey, did you hear what Shot did? Did you hear what Shot did?
Yeah.
You know, and then they would have hooked up. Everyone hooked up in Fort Edmonton once a year and had a little hoo-ha, and I'm sure it was big news. So when I had that little revelation, suddenly it was like, wow. And that was the point where I started really trying to bring more of that history and my own history into what it is that I do, right?
Yeah.
Now, my grandmother was born on a trap line, probably 20 odd kilometers into the bush outside of Fort Chipewyan. And, her parents were trappers at the time. Now I'm out looking for animals a lot in form of an economy as well, but I'm not killing them and wearing them. I'm just taking people to have a look at them and talk about them. And I am trying to learn more about the animals, not just from the biologic perspective, but from a more of an indigenous perspective, the significance of certain animals and, and what we learned from animals,
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm really fascinated with wolves from that perspective, because I see a lot of our societies and the evolution of our societies being in such correlation with wolves. It's amazing.
Oh yeah, no kidding, eh?
Yeah.
Well, and I don't think people understand how impactful wolves are to the entire ecosystem.
No.
And, there was an article put out a couple of years ago, about how when they reintroduced wolves into Yellowstone, how it changed, like even the course of the rivers changed, and stuff like that. And it, even for me, I was reading it and I was thinking, wow, like this is more impact than even I understood. And I thought I was really up on it, right? But
the connectivity is huge. That whole Yellowstone project, and even to further that connectivity, just back to me here, is those wolves came from here, from Jasper and just outside Jasper National Park. The 32 wolves that they introduced into Yellowstone came from here. So we have a connection to that whole story. But you're right. I remember exactly what you're talking about. And actually, you can find these cool sort of short 2.5-minute videos about that reintroduction in Yellowstone and the connectivity. And what you're saying is the wolves are now taking down more ungulate. The ungulate were eating too much, which was allowing the rivers to erode, these aspens. And it's just unbelievable.
Well, and then you think, okay, well, that's wolves. And I know just, I think it was last spring or fall, they reintroduced bison out into Banff, into where they naturally were. And I can't help but think, because there was people like, wow, do we really need to do that? And I thought, the whole point, though, is you don't understand the balance that has been lost since those bison aren't there.
Again, you can look up. I was just down in Canmore last Monday, and I sat in at Parks did a little interp on the buffalo reintroduction into the Panther Valley, and that sort of connectivity again, it's unbelievable. Like they went right through. What did they say? There was something like 300 different species of insects that could be found in one buffalo patty. 300 species.
Wow.
The tufting for birds' nests. It's just, again, it's endless, right? It's a pretty cool program. It's a really cool program. I think if you look up to the Buffalo Treaty that was signed down in Montana between the different indigenous peoples, they're mostly Blackfoot people, I think.
Yeah.
But in your area down there with the different Blackfoot Confederacy I think there's hopes too that they'll have some more buffalo out on the plains, just kind of roaming free, hopefully sooner than later.
Well, I sure hope so. I think there is a group here that is working to that end, to certainly reintroduce the buffalo back to the prairies. So I really truly hope that happens. I mean, it's I don't know. It's just there's a balance there that needs to be replaced, and I don't know if we'll ever truly get back to that balance. But I mean, we can certainly do what we can to get as close as we can, right?
That kind of balance. I mean, what their estimates, some depending on what you read, their estimates are anywhere from sort of like 30 to 90 million buffalo roaming the Great Plains when Europe rolled out into it.
Yeah.
And the one thing, I mean, certainly they could be Elk Island National Park outside of Edmonton is sort of the birthplace of where all of these buffalo are coming from for reintroductions. That's where the Banff buffalo came from. But, buffalo need a lot of space to roam, and everything's bisected by barbed wire. So it's
tough.
Pretty hard thing to do now, right?
Absolutely.
But
yeah,
it's pretty cool.
No, it is. It's great to see these things. And it's funny. I'll every once in a while I'll see somebody post something about wildlife overpasses and how, oh my God, what a unique thing, new thing that people are doing. I'm like, well, I don't know. We've had them down in Banff National Park for like 15 years, 20 years. So I think there is some good things that we've done. Certainly, we can always do better, but.
Yeah, you can. So there, that whole thing that the wildlife overpasses and underpasses. Here in Jasper, actually, last summer, I'm doing tours and I'm heading towards the eastern side of the park, and suddenly I notice, I don't know, there's like a whole pile, many kilometers of stakes on the side of the road, and I'm like, huh. And at that time, there's all kinds of infrastructure work being done. The federal government, I think, is something like $300 million investment in basically just, infrastructure repair and whatnot.
Wow.
So they were doing roads and this, that, and the other thing. And I think, Jesus, what are these posts for here? And I called Parks up and, no, I didn't call Parks at first. I ran into a buddy of mine who's a park warden. I said, hey, do you know anything about all these stakes along the highway? He said, I don't have a clue what you're talking about. All right, okay. So a couple days later, I run into him again, and he comes up to me. He says, hey, remember you asked me about those stakes? He said, yeah, well, this other warden comes walking into the office, Parks head office downtown, with a handful of them going, what the hell are all these stakes doing, right? And Parks Highways Division and the park superintendent and his staff here, the highways division doesn't report to the super here. So it seemed to be a little bit of, they weren't, one hand wasn't shaking the other in that moment. And I think what happened, I'm just going to have to ballpark this and guess, but what happened was, with this infrastructure money, highways was given money. And you know how it is with some of this funding. If you don't spend it, you won't get that funding next year, sort of thing.
Oh, yeah.
So I think they just went ahead and they surveyed a line and they hammered these stakes in for a fence, like the one that runs through Banff National Park on the Trans-Canada Highway.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, okay, and I understand the logic behind something like that. I certainly don't want to see that mortality rate for wildlife go up.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I also think there's other options, like slow down.
Yes.
You're in a national park. We already have that one corridor, let's say the Trans-Canada Highway through Banff, which is twinned both ways, and people are bombing through it and they're in a hurry. Okay, fine. But you're coming through Jasper National Park, east to west. It's about, just slightly under 100 kilometers from East Gate to West Gate.
Yeah.
And if you had to slow down, and this is, truck traffic in particular, because they're hitting more animals than anybody else.
Oh, yeah.
Big transport trucks.
Yeah.
If you had to slow down, let's say by an average, you're down to 70 kilometers and 50 or less in high mortality zones, you're going to add tops an hour to your trip.
Yeah.
Okay, and if you don't like that, you can go up north through Grand Prairie. You could go down through Banff and see how much that adds to your day.
Oh, exactly.
Like, it's going to actually add you another day.
Yeah.
And as far as visitors go, hey, you've come to the national park. Don't be in such a hurry. Take your time and have a look around.
Yeah.
That I think is not a bad alternative to. I don't know how many millions and millions of dollars it would cost to put up that fence. And then once again, to put up underpasses and overpasses in some of those pinch points,
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and like you said, you're in a national park. Just slow down. I mean, that's kind of a metaphor of life. Just once you get there, just slow down a bit.
I actually spoke directly to the park superintendent on this issue. And then at the year AGM, during the question period here just last March. I brought it up one more time, just to know if there would be a consultation process in this, so that maybe when and if there is one, if they're actually going to go through with the fence, that I could bring it up then again there. And, whether or not that would fall on deaf ears, that's yet to be heard. Yeah. And there's things that happen. I mean, I'm sure I don't know if you've ever seen the Glacier Discovery Skywalk that Brewster put up down by the ice fields.
I've seen it. Yeah, I've never been on it, but yeah. I've seen it.
Yeah, I mean, not to knock anything. There's people who enjoy that experience, but there's a lot of people who will argue that the consultation process was false, that they didn't go through the right channels, and that Brewster just sort of greased some wheels somewhere in Ottawa. I mean, I can't. That's just speculation and secondhand news, but I certainly just hope that the processes before they do this are abided by, and that we come to the logical conclusion. But smarter people than me make these kinds of decisions, Darcy.
Well, we hope that they're smarter, but I don't know. Sometimes I wonder. I really enjoyed the conversation with Joe. I hope you guys did as well. I want to thank Joe for taking the time to chat with me, and I look forward to having him back on the show one of these days. We have even more of this conversation up on our Patreon page. Joe and I continue talking, and we talk about his involvement in Indigenous tourism and the work that is being done to promote Indigenous tourism through Indigenous-led groups, which is very important. This is part of the exclusive content that we keep telling you about, so head over to our Patreon page and become a patron, and you will hear not only more of this conversation, but all of the exclusive content that we have up there so far. Next week, Jason and I will be back in the studio breaking down the latest Métis headlines and stories. So until then, the jig is up.
You are the spark that's starting a fire that will spread across this land. And it will be a fire that doesn't burn, but a fire that cleanses. A fire that ignites in our hearts and creates light. No more living in darkness. Our time